All right, welcome everybody. Good to see you again. We're at New Faculty Orientation, and we're here talking about the intellectual competency. You'll remember we have these 8 competencies, and so just you see them up there on the screen. This time we get to this intellectual competency, and I find I have to give a small disclaimer about this because there are many of us who are involved in practical work, in professional work. And intellectual doesn't always seem to fit, and yet it fits in the sense that in a university we're inviting students to think. We're inviting them to use their minds in ways that maybe they never have, maybe they won't. Leaving here, we hope that's not true. We hope that they will become good thinkers, but thinking about how faith integration can help people develop their ability to think Christianly is an opportunity for faith integration. So this competency is defined as the ability to access intellectual virtues and practices, critical thinking resources for thoughtful and creative engagement in academic faith integration, both personally and with students. And by personally, that means that you develop your ability to do that, and then as a result, you turn around and create ways to involve your students in that as well. On the front page of your notes, I put this quote from Arthur Holmes. Arthur Holmes, who is for many years a professor of philosophy at Wheaton College and one of the faith integration gurus who we're grateful for, one of those whose footsteps we follow in, has this book called All Truth is God's Truth. And I want to just put this quote there and then the question that follows just to sort of ground our thinking as we go forward. There's lots of small discussions I want to invite you to have today. I want to give you different ideas and then get you just talking even for a few minutes about this. But here's how Holmes starts us. He says, neither faith nor revelation nor experience, for all they do contribute, provide a royal road that bypasses fallible, rational processes. We simply cannot avoid reasoning. Knowing and understanding the truth is too valuable to be inhibited by fear of error, and there is no other way to grasp truth than by using the rational powers that God has created in us. Revelation is a source of knowledge that informs our reasoning, but it is not a substitute for human thought. So what I'd like you to be thinking about as we go forward today, I'm not asking you to discuss this, but just to kind of have it in your mind. In what ways have you, as a Christian scholar educator, and that Christian part is important here, how have you engaged yourself in the rational processes of which Holmes speaks, that he endorses? You're a Christian like me who appreciates that God has revealed His truth to us, that we have a sacred text that we can go to. But how about thinking as a Christian? And how have you equipped your students to think Christianly as well? How has that turned into what you might do in the classroom? Okay. So in our faith integration work, we've got worldviews that we're working with. We've got the worldview of our discipline that we've inherited. We've been told by those who trained us, here's how people like us think. Historians think differently than linguists, and scientists think differently than people in the legal system, and that's a part of who we are as we sit here today. But we also have inherited a Christian worldview, and for some, that may be a fairly recent inheritance. For some, you've had that for a long time. And faith integration is, of course, interested in us bringing these into engagement with each other. So when it comes to the intellectual competency, I want to suggest to you a number of different ways today that we can bring those things into conversation, that the way we're encouraged to approach and think about the world in light of Christian faith and how that plays itself out in our disciplines, there's lots of different things we can do. And just representative of many different ways. We'll talk a little bit about intellectual virtues. I want to make some suggestions about selecting authorities and how we can help students do that, how we can do that. Related to disciplinary methods and habits of mind, how they can be useful. Critical thinking, of course, as a common practice in higher education, and disciplines of study. Particularly, I want to talk about the discipline or the practice of reading and how that can be helpful to us in this way. So we'll take those on one at a time, and then I'll encourage you to talk to each other for a few minutes so we can move through each of these. The first is related to intellectual virtues, and I think most of you would know that in addition to the moral virtues, Aristotle and other ancient thinkers, Christian and non-Christian, mainstream folks, have given to us a set of dispositions that suggest here's ways to engage knowledge. Here's ways to pursue truth. In Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which I'm reading right now with my honor students, we're in the midst of that section on the intellectual virtues and trying to get our mind around what is prudence and wisdom and how do these things work, and theoria and analyzing things from a thoughtful perspective. Here's a more contemporary list. A constellation comes from a well-known scholar in the field of critical thinking. If you look him up, you'll find tons of stuff related to critical thinking and intellectual virtues. Richard Paul is his name. He's done writing with another woman named Linda Elder, and they identify these as intellectual traits or virtues. So why don't you just look at that list for a minute and sort of capture what it is. You might have others that aren't on the list that you think are relevant. I want to invite you for a few minutes to discuss, and these are in your notes, and then I'll go back to the picture so you can look at it. But at your tables, discuss for a few minutes. Are there intellectual virtues which have relevant correlation to the content of one or more of your courses? So when you think about what you're teaching and you look at these virtues, you say, oh, there's one that I think has a connection. And then kind of out of that, does the Christian faith offer further insight for understanding, developing, and or applying this virtue? So the idea here is that virtues are not an uncommon way of thinking for Christians and for people who don't have a Christian worldview, a Christian perspective. We all use that. How can a Christian perspective help us to recognize and use and work with a virtue maybe differently or in a fuller kind of way than otherwise might be available to us? So let me go back to that and invite you to talk for about 4 or 5 minutes, just quickly sharing some ideas related to your class and possibilities here. Okay? Ready, go. So let me give you some further examples that might just inspire you in your own context, right? So in science comes with its worldview and its interest and its practices. And in Christian faith, there are some ultimate concerns that God has about that which He has created. You can't see it here, but it's the passage from Luke 12 that says, and He pays attention even to the last detail. He numbers the hairs on your head. And so when you think about a virtue that might bring those together, an intellectual virtue, it might be attention to detail, right? In the lab and in the work that a scientist must do, it must be very careful work. It must be committed to a thoughtful process and to not being sloppy about that, not missing things as best as can be done. And so attention to detail might be a practice there and a virtue there. Computer science. Maybe one of the fears at the far end of it, and there's lots of movies, of course, about this. If you saw, I saw a few months ago the new Terminator, what is it called? Genesis, I think, you know. So that at a far end, that technology would recognize it has limits, right? That it taken too far, it could be a problem. A Christian might say we need to be cautious about putting technology in a place of idolatry and saying, oh, it's going to be our savior. So what might be an intellectual virtue that might help us there? Well, I think intellectual courage is that kind of thing. To look deeply at those things, but then also to have the courage to say, but there's also another way to view this, and I can argue for that from an intellectual standpoint as well. And I can grapple with that and be unafraid to look at both sides of that issue. A person in the arts who might be interested in transformational performance, they would like to see lives changed because of what they've produced in their artistic endeavors. This is one not on Richard Paul's list, but how about creative craftsmanship? The ability to develop the virtue to be creative in their crafting of their work in a way that what they produce, what they make as a result of their artistic endeavors is characterized by that kind of careful, creative craftsmanship. A person in political science might say, I can draw value from the story of William Wilberforce, and his story in and of itself might be inspiring, but what's the intellectual virtue that brings those things together? Well, for Wilberforce, not only did he physically and politically never give up, but he intellectually stayed at it. I mean, the guy, looking at his story, he kept learning new things about the racial issues in England at the time. He kept learning new things about how to communicate the issue. He had a kind of intellectual perseverance that helped him to be able to get to that point. So you've got a subject. I'm going to give you one more chance to talk just for a couple minutes and see if anything here got you thinking about how something related to faith might be represented in a virtue that you could help your students understand and take hold of. So just a couple quick conversations at your table if this might have inspired some other ideas in you. Okay? 2 minutes, ready, go. So as you go forward with this, I will say to you that there are lots of things available in the library and other places where you can study more about intellectual virtues. One is a website I've listed here, the Intellectual Virtues in Education Project. It's been underway for about the last 3 or 4 years. There's a book described there. There's some videos. There's some conference presentations. Most of this, what you'll find, is not explicitly faith-based in its description. So that becomes a part of your opportunity to think about how you might look at these, again, in light of particulars from Christian faith. One book I'll recommend to you here, if you're interested, that's helpful on this topic and other related themes on this intellectual competency is called The Habits of Mind. I think that's the title, by James Sire. James Sire, S-I-R-E. Did I list it there? Awesome. See, I was ahead of myself. So is that the name of it?
Habits of the Mind, Intellectual Life as a Christian Calling.
Habits of the Mind, Intellectual Life as a Christian Calling. And he's got some description of intellectual virtues in there. That might be one place to look. There's other places that you can find things as well as you think about this from a faith integration perspective. Okay, let's go to this second idea. And it's this idea of selecting authorities. So I'm thinking about a student who might do a research project or who you might want to send to the library or to the databases in order to identify things that can be helpful for them in their particular work. So right now, as I think I've mentioned to you, I'm doing a class on food and faith. My students just submitted the outline of their research project and the initial attempts at finding thoughtful resources. I asked them to find 2 generic resources, mainstream resources, and 2 that come out of faith. And so I'm looking at those right now, and I'm thinking in some cases, wow, I'm amazed, I'm impressed, 18-year-olds finding good stuff. And in other cases, well, not so much, right? There are some sources that I don't think were found with discernment. The point of this is that we want to help our students, ourselves and our students, recognize that God has revealed His truth. God, in common grace, has made a knowledge and good things available to people other than just Christian people. And that as we are discerning and are looking at those things and making use of them, they can be very helpful to us from an academic perspective. And I may have shown you this slide. This is a slide that shows up in a number of my presentations because I think it's so worthy to hear from John Wesley, who says, "To imagine none can teach you, but those who are themselves saved from sin is a very great and dangerous mistake. Give not place to it for a moment." So John Wesley would say we need to draw upon other authorities. We can find value in things that other people have to say. And so discernment becomes an important skill, or it's another virtue, in identifying sources that can be worthily used, that can be evaluated in meaningful kinds of ways. So I'd like you to talk just for a few minutes, and maybe you've already done some things like this in your teaching, or maybe it's asking, how do I do it for myself, and how could I do it, help my students to do this better? What's a strategy? And that might be too big a word for a short conversation. Okay, that's fine. What would a strategy to teach and model discernment that incorporates a faith perspective look like? I'm going to send my students out. I'm going to ask them to draw upon the insights of other authorities. How might I help them to do that in a faith-related way, with faith as a part of their grid? So see if you can come up with some ideas together around your table in the next few minutes. So I'll give you 3 things that I do on this. One is to encourage students, if they can, to find out a little bit more about the author. And with Wikipedia and other things these days, it's often possible, right? You can look someone up and you can find out maybe a little biography, maybe even an autobiography. And so that's about a couple of things from a faith perspective. Rather than just taking their words and saying, okay, this is what I've got, and I'm just going to take the words on the page, I want to be respectful of the human being who thought about these things. And I want to recognize what may have inspired their interest in talking about this. And it may be something about their training, their educational training. It may be something tragic in their life. It may be something that they discovered or something from their family. And so people who write things, authorities, are human beings and they have a story, and appreciating that is important. Secondly, I might suggest you try to understand their methodology. And that's about, just as I want you, students, to be careful and thoughtful in how you approach the research task. You too should ask, how did this person approach the research task? If someone seems to have thrown something together and didn't follow the parameters of the discipline, and this is not a careful experiment or project, then I might be less likely to engage them, right? I might choose somebody else other than this person. And so that's this idea that God is a God of order, and that there are orderly ways to do research and to put your thoughts together. And I'm interested in their method or their order in trying to affirm and appreciate that part of God. And then I might say, as you review this source, what's their message? And maybe their message, they think all they're doing here is communicating what they discovered. It's just a repacking of their observations and providing a kind of neutral explanation. But other times, of course, people have a mission, an agenda, something that they want these readers, you and me and these students, to become convinced of. And so giving them an opportunity to communicate that and get inside their head and their thinking, and they're writing clearly on that. But then that also allows me to say, okay, if this is what they want me to believe, how does that play against what I do believe? It doesn't mean I should foreclose and be done and not give it a chance, but it does, now I can say there is a difference in what I come into this with and what this person is bringing to me. So those are just some ways, along with things that you've suggested, that we can. So here's one way that I have translated this with my students. I don't do this in every class, but I've done this a number of times. In asking them to journal about some of their reading. So this would be in the syllabus or in a handout or something. To ask them, okay, what is this author trying to explain? And to sort of state that, and to see if they can identify the assumptions behind that. And in light of that, what might be a response of faith? So some responses might include to question this explanation, or to reject this explanation, or to research it further, or to think about other Christian perspectives on this explanation. The what is proclaimed is about asking, what is this person sort of urgent and passionate about convincing you of? Not just what they're explaining, but what is it that they sort of see as their mission? What are they preaching? Well, one response could be, it's true. I need to change as a result of what I've seen here. Or I need to give an alternative response to this because this is clearly outside of how a Christian might think, or a response of obedience. What does disdained mean? What is this author saying is bad or not true or false? And do I agree with that? And from a faith perspective, how do I respond to that? Now, I don't want students to just give assertions. The Bible says it's not true. Or my preacher said that's wrong. I want them to be able to develop their own careful, thoughtful arguments to that, but of course that's developmental, right? And over time they'll get there. So that's just one example. I hope you have others of thinking about this idea of reading from a faith perspective. So here's old Thomas Goodwin. Long, long time ago, he was the president of Magdalen College in Oxford. So I got to read this carefully. Indeed, thoughts and affections are sibi mutuo causae, that is, they are the mutual causes of each other. He quotes Psalm 39, whilst I mused, the fire burned. So that thoughts are the bellows that kindle and inflame affections, and then if they are inflamed, they cause thoughts to boil. Let you stew on that for a minute, or I can just give you the Reader's Digest edition. Good thinking builds passionate faith. So we don't need to just minister and serve the emotional side of our students to deepen their passions and their heart for God and their faith on a deeper level. Good thinking and helping them to think well, develop their own intellectual competencies can get them there. And it'll get us there too. So here's a few things that might be helpful to you. This book called Naming the Elephant is about worldview from a Christian perspective. It's a little bit philosophical. You may or may not like that kind of thing, but I highly recommend this as a way to think about what worldview is. Really a wonderful book. It's in its second edition. I pointed to this book earlier from Brookfield, Teaching for Critical Thinking, a good outline of what's all involved in that process. And then one of our leading thinkers in Enlightenment thinking was Immanuel Kant, Religion Within the Limits of Reason. A number of years later, a few hundred years later, Nicholas Wolterstorff wrote a response to that, Reason Within the Bounds of Religion. And he's going to say, here's how Christians think. And here's ways to do that in a thoughtful way. Wolterstorff, a very respected Christian philosopher and thinker. I hope you're continuing to work on your portfolios, and we'll be working on those together in a couple of months. But I thank you for coming, for being a part of this conversation.